In the house where I grew up, we had a room we called the library. It was not a real library, of course. It was just a small den dominated by a television set. But there were bookshelves built into all four walls, and hundreds of books, hardback books with spines of many colors, surrounded us in that room. The books collected by my parents and grandparents throughout their lifetimes were a part of my childhood. My generation, the generation that came of age in the 1950s and 1960s, may be the last one to know the feeling of being surrounded by millions of words. For now, in the midst of the 1970s, we are seeing a subtle but unmistakable turning away from such things. The houses of America, I fear, may soon include no room for libraries. The hardcover book, that symbol of the permanence of thought, the handing down of wisdom from one age to the next, may be a new addition to our list of endangered species. Stories of problems young people have with reading are not new, but the trend seems to be worsening. Recently, the chancellor of the University of Illinois said that 10% of the freshmen of his institution could read no better than the average 8th grader. As dismal a commentary as this is, there is an even more chilling aspect to it. Of those college freshmen whose reading skills were equivalent to the 8th grade level, many had ranked in the top half of their high school classes. Students do not read anymore. They listen to record albums. Even after 4 years on campus, some college graduates can hardly read or write. The ramifications of this situation brings to the nation are obvious, and will become even more so in the years to come. A first work of fiction, if it has any luck at all, will sell perhaps 3,000 copies in its hardback edition. Publishers and authors know not to expect much better than that. And a record album? A new group called Boston released an album of the same name a year ago. It is their first album. So far, it has sold 3.5 million copies. Much of the problem is that we live in a passive age. To listen to a record album, to sit through a movie, to watch a television show, all require nothing of the cultural consumer save his mere presence. To read a book, though, takes an act of will on the part of the consumer. He must genuinely want to find out what is inside. He cannot just sit there. He must do something, even though the something is as simple an action as opening the book, closing the book, and beginning to read. In generations before my own, this was taken for granted as an important part of life. But now, in the day of the information retrieval system, such a reverence is not being placed on the reading and then the saving of books. If a young American reads at all, he is far more likely to purchase a paperback that may be flipped through and then thrown away. In a disposable age, the book for keeping and rereading is an anachronism, a ponderous dinosaur in a high-speed society. The example of books, of course, can be carried too far. A few hardback books, the much publicized bestsellers, are moving well, and the paperback business is one of the nation's true growth industries. But it seems to me that the readers are older as a group than they ever were before. This only illustrates the point that a new generation is choosing the passive over the active, the expendable over the lasting. My mother writes letters. On special occasions, she sits down and puts her thoughts and emotions on paper, and she sends the letters to her children. The letters are beautiful and clearly intended for keeping. My mother is of a generation when doing such a thing was expected. Hers is a generation of steamer trunks in the cellar, filled with the important letters of a lifetime, the expressions of love and pride committed to paper. Like most people today, I don't write letters, I telephone. On one level, we are products of the phone company's commercials telling us how good it is to make our voices heard across the miles. But the real reason we call instead of write is the same as the reason we are more likely to turn on television than pick up a book. It is easier. It gets the job done. A thought is expressed or a story is absorbed. The significance is fleeting, gone in an instant. This is especially ironic in a season during which such an emphasis has been placed on finding our individual roots. For while many Americans are toiling to trace the origins of their culture and their beings, a new generation is making sure that future roots will be almost impossible to uncover. It is almost as though we were willing it. Pity the researcher 50 years from now who seeks to learn about us from our thoughtful reflections recorded on paper. We save no written record of who we have been and what we have learned. We relocate from place to place at such a dizzying pace that the logical question is whether we are really just moving or running away. We change jobs so easily that lifestyle has become more meaningful as a term than career. We standardize and franchise our places of lodging and eating to such an extent that it is almost impossible to distinguish one part of the country from another. What does this mean? What does the preference for the transitory over the lasting bode? Nothing, perhaps, just the inevitability of change, perhaps.
So.